Well, thanks so much for tuning into the Market Wrap. I'm Niraj Shah with Nickey Mirchandani, and it turned out to be yet another interesting day of trade simply because banks continue to rise and shine. We dipped a bit, ebbs and lows, but I think ended well. So the key takeaways, much as people would want to see other things participating, I think banks are still ruling the roost and still doing well. I think the SBI results led to the uptick in the PSU banks as well, because of which that sentiment stays robust. I think today you saw some of the undervalued commodity linked stocks as well moving up. The ONGCs, power names like NTPC, etc., do well. So that was the other big thing that happened today. I think the bread stayed upbeat. Tire stocks in particular did do well post Apollo Tires numbers, but I think the result reactions are being seen, and maybe Nicky will talk about that a bit. Maybe Prince, Apollo, etc., all of them did well. But first, let's talk about the Nifty and what the Nifty did in the session today. So at the in the last 1.5 hours, did really well and ended the day about 0.71% higher. ITC moving, but SPI was the clear showstopper, 5.5% post the numbers and the commentary. Some gains for Bajaj Finance as well. But like I said, some of the commodity linked names, Coal India, ONGC, Shree Cement, I think they had some pretty good run. JSW Steel about a couple of percentage points. What didn't do well? Asian Paints took a little bit of a stick. Cipla came off after 2 days of a gain, and Airtel, despite all the hoo-ha around the numbers and the uptick out of the numbers, did come off post numbers. So not a very impressive day for Bharti Airtel for sure. Let's wait and watch how it goes going ahead. Nicky, what large caps stood out? There are a bunch of them which actually have reasons for which they made the moves today. What has stood out for you? Okay, maybe Nicky's not there. I would reckon that one of the obvious choices would be State Bank of India, really. So that's the one key thing, simply because of the kind of numbers that came in. In fact, if you log on to our website, BloombergQuint.com, I think Vishy, my colleague, has put out interesting data about the our numbers as well. But this is what they did, right? The net profit flattish, NI up 4%, but the conversation around the asset quality, provisioning, etc., all of that, I think stood out. The gross NPAs came off, the net NPAs came off, and I think this should sit well. This should sit well for sentiment around PSU banks as well. Actually, if you look at the broader end of the spectrum, and let me try and focus there, you will see a bunch of these PSU banking names do well. They may not feature in NSE 500 necessarily, but we'll try and draw up a chart or two individually. But first, let's get the NSE 500, the Nifty 500, the BSE 500, either of the indices on the charts, the MOV function on the Bloomberg terminal, and it'll show us the market breadth for that larger index. And then, of course, the individual movers and shakers that have moved around in the session today as well should come up on your screen in a minute. You saw a clutch of the winners there. So Apollo Tires, for example, did really well for itself. Prince Pipes did really well for itself. DLF was doing reasonably okay for itself. What didn't do well were the likes of Godrej Properties, which post its numbers came off a little bit. So that didn't have the best of days, to be honest. And those were a few disappointments in the session today. In fact, while we are waiting for the chart, maybe there's some issue there, but let me just try and read out a few winners and losers. So Jewel and Food up about 7%. Tata Power had a big move, 6.5%. But Apollo Tires, big deal. After the big move in trade yesterday, up another 6% today. There's some strength in Sun TV, I must say, 6%. On the budget date, it sunk to about 480. From there, it's come up all the way to 550. So that did well. And then while Godrej Properties didn't do well, DLF certainly did well for itself, about 4% higher for itself. And of course, Adani Enterprises and Adani Green, both of the Adani Group stocks actually did really well for themselves. So those were the other two which did okay for themselves. Well, I'm presuming Nicky's back with me maybe. And Nicky, if you're there, I was talking about the broader end of the spectrum and what stocks move around. What were the newsmakers out there today?
Oh, actually pick numbers which have done well for itself, like Thermax. EBITDA was up as much as 30-odd% in trade, in the Q3 earnings, because of which the stock was rather one of the the topmost performer that we had on Nifty 50 index, because of which you've seen that smart gains coming in. And apart from that, Jubilant FoodWorks also reported better than estimate results for Q3, and the company reached the 100% pre-COVID levels during Q3. Strong momentum in delivery and takeaway. To an extent, dine-in still is operating to a 42% kind of a pre-COVID level. So some amount of recovery for that segment overall. Until now, Hindustan Copper too has been doing well. It has surged on good Q3 Q3 show. So copper as a commodity also has done pretty well in terms of the base metal packs that we have, and because of which you're seeing some amount of gains coming in for Hindustan Copper as well. So that's that in terms of broad list of stocks that I have in the broader indices. But then, what are you picking up, Niraj? Any stock that you'll be keeping an eye out on?
So, it's interesting, Nikki, simply because I was speaking about this yesterday as well, that telecom may be firmly in focus in the next few days. I think the Industar dividend numbers, the record dates, etc. So Bharti gets a hefty dividend on the 7th, if I'm not wrong, or thereabouts. So that'll be interesting. And then if indeed the MSCI notification, etc., happens sometime next week, then that keeps that stock excited. Reliance, of course, perennially stays in news, and if Idea manages to do something around its funding, which has been long spoken about, then that entire pocket firmly remains in focus for the next 10 days. So I think we'll be watching out for that. But for now, it has to be banking, really. What about you, Nikki? IPOs, all the global markets, what's standing up?
Well, I'd like to add a point here, because MSCI has also come up for review on Feb 9th, and few of the reports have also been suggesting about some changes happening to Bharti Airtel down there because of the kind of dividend that it's been facing or it's going to be declaring in some point of time. So that's, of course, one counter that most of the investor community would like to keep an eye out on. And if you talk about the global front right now, the picture seems to be pretty decent. European markets are all trading positive. There are a bunch of positive earnings which have actually come and beat in the likes of Nokia, be it in terms of Shell, or they've reported better set of numbers. And if you look at Bayer, that also has settled the claim. But at this point of time, if you see, there seems to be selling pressure which is actually mounted in. Apart from FTSE, most of them are down and out. Probably flattish undertone with negative bias, but nevertheless, profit booking has crept in. And US markets at this point of time, the stock futures are indicating to a positive start coming in for Wall Street. But that's all that we have in this leg of the trade. Thank you so much for joining in.